So you've been scrolling for a few hours and you realise you're getting bored, you're getting quite frustrated, and you're starting to think quite negatively of yourself. That's okay. What I want to remind you of is that frustration is actually a good thing. It's a positive thing if we think about it in the right way. And that's why I want to introduce you to this book, which is Inward Bound by Sam Keen, because he's got a lovely little phrase on page 78, which will help to really make this super, super clear. Super short, I'll just read it out now. Frustration is a vital sign. The soul is still beating its wings against the cage. Super, super straightforward. One single line can perfectly encapsulate all of this. What we need to do is we need to see it as a vital sign. To be frustrated is to be frustrated that we are not doing that thing that we know that we should be doing, but doing this instead. But if we really, really look at that, if we pay careful attention to it, what we're saying there is we've got a goal, we've got something we want to work towards, we've got a value that we'd like to pursue, but we're just not quite doing it. So we need to become quite aware of why it is that we are not doing it, but also giving ourselves the credit and actually being able to raise our self-esteem to say, look, I actually do want to do something, but there's just something blocking me. Maybe it might be an unconscious block that I've got at this point in time. I just need to raise it to my awareness. But that's what we need to try to look at. That's why we need to understand this element of frustration. And if we look at like the modern world at this point in time, let's say I need to go from where I am now to where I work. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be walking down a straight path. I'm going to be driving on a straight road. I can use Google Maps and tell on my phone exactly in straight linear lines exactly how I'm going to get there. But that's not how the mind works. It's not how we've evolved. It's not how we've developed. We don't think in direct straight lines. We think in stories. We think by meandering. We don't just immediately assume to get from point A to point B, I go the shortest possible distance. We like the experience of the story. We like the meander. We like the spontaneity that comes along with all of this, which is partly what makes us a human and not a machine, which is another point that he makes very, very early on in this book. It's a fantastic book, by the way, this on boredom, just in general, which I think is also completely and utterly misunderstood in the modern world. But just to make it really clear about what I'm talking about when I talk about the machines and the machine mindset and this idea of walking in straight lines compared to meandering, it's explained in a lovely, lovely way on page 19, so very early on in the book. By contrast, survival in the modern world depends on our ability to adapt ourselves to the monotonous or the efficient or the orderly or the standardized world created by the machine. A virtuous machine makes no mistake, creates no surprise, and repeats itself ad infinitum, ad nauseum, basically forever. The virtues we produce are punctuality, dependability, predictability, and conformity to law and order. Repetition, regularity, and orderliness are a triumph in former ages, but they have become a terror in modern times. And I think that's so important to keep in mind, especially when we think about ourselves, especially in my case, of when I've been overly punctual, overly orderly, overly dependent. And in this case there, dependent in the sense of dependability. And I've praised myself for that. I've been proud of that. But actually what I'm being proud of there is it's a perfectionism. It's a fault in its own way. It's me saying that ideally who I am is someone who never makes mistakes, and I stick to this path so clearly that I'm so optimized in my way of life that I don't need to veer away. But that creates a problem in and of itself. I'm a human being, I'm not a machine. I need to be able to have a look at these values and think, how is it that I should use them in a healthy way rather than an overabundant kind of way? In the same way, if you're adding salt to your meal, you want a certain amount of salt to bring out the flavor, but too much salt is going to ruin the entire meal altogether. It's going to make it inedible. In the same way, I need to be able to think, how can I sprinkle in orderliness? How can I sprinkle in predictability and conformity to law and order without that being my life in general, without it potentially being your life in general? How can it be like the salt that helps to season that meal rather than being the meal itself, which is completely unpalatable? No one's going to eat just salt on its own. So what we need to do is we need to think about it as, if we're trying to consider frustration as a vital sign, we need to try to dip back into our humanness rather than our machine-like tendencies. How is it that we can start to go off path? How is it we can start to explore an idea in a different way, or to experiment with a different mode of being? How is it that we can learn to introduce play into work? Things that seem contradictory, but actually, how is it that they can actually start to complement each other as well? Frustration is a vital sign. It means that you want to do something, but that you're not quite yet doing it. So what I'd like to do to make this as practical and as simple as possible is ask you one question, which has occurred to me throughout this book over and over and over again, and it is stated very, very early on in this book as well, which is this. What is the most important thing that hasn't yet happened? So just to make that really, really clear again, what is the most important thing that hasn't yet happened? And if you can glimpse at an idea of that, just even if it's just an intuitive idea without much thought, we can start to lead ourselves towards that place that we know that we need to go. And we might be repeatedly frustrated on that attempt, and we might stumble towards it, we might meander away from it at times and then come back in. But the point is, we know where it is that we are heading, and as a result, we can then take our own route to get there. That's the most important part. We're not just downloading an optimized route and following somebody else's path step by step. We're learning how to explore and to also accept a certain amount of spontaneity and error, if you want to consider it that way, so that we can actually move away from that over regularity, that over dependence on orderliness, so we can move towards something they actually want. So like I was saying, what is the most important thing that hasn't happened yet? That could be today, it could be this week, it could be this month, it could be this year. But as soon as you can grasp an answer to that, then you've got an idea of what it is that you are stumbling towards. And that should be the way we think about this. Rather than thinking about it as, how do we get the most hyper-optimized, fastest, most efficient way of getting from point A to point B? It should be, right, I've got a rough idea of where I want to go, and I'm going to start my journey as I get there. I'm going to create stories for myself as I go on that journey, so that I can talk about them as well when I meet with other people who are also on their own journeys. That's what life is. It's narrative, it's story. It's not just hard facts. They don't motivate us. What we need to do is try to dip back into what it is that makes us human, rather than just passively accepting a lot of the values and a lot of the virtues that get passed off in modern day, which are actually just a subtle praise of the machine-like operations which are happening all around us. So one final repetition of this. What is the most important thing that hasn't happened yet? And if you're getting frustrated as you're trying to figure out even an answer to that question, good, that's okay, that's fine. Frustration is a vital sign. Think of yourself as a bird in a cage, flapping its wings, beating its wings against that cage. It's a frustrating situation to be in. It's not the best situation to be in, but it shows that you're alive, it shows that you care, it shows that you're vital, and there is a way out of that cage, and there is a way that you can get to that point B. But you've got to develop your own stories, which are going to be developed en route to actually get there. These thoughts are not my own thoughts. I've worded them in my own way, but they are very much based on this book, this amazing book, Inward Bound by Sam Keen. And yes, I am a bit of a Sam Keen fanboy. You're going to get quite a few book recommendations from him. That's just another one.